Well, this past presidential campaign has offered a lot of opportunities for character assassination researchers to explore different areas of this, growing field, of course. And I can think of any person who knows more about crisis communication and crisis management on different parts of the study than Eric Dezenhall, our keynote speaker. We had this ongoing relationship with Eric for about 2 years now. First, when I came across his book called The Glass Joe, and feel free to take a look at the copy at the registration desk. And I was amazed how timely and how hands-on that book was. And we started using that book in my class, and students had such a great time just reading that book and learning and getting all these teachable moments from it. So Eric Dezenhall, you see, now, he has so much in demand, so very happy to have him, but you can see him on Meet the Press, you can see him all over the internet, you can see him on television. So in addition to heading Dezenhall Resources, of course, he is the faculty of Georgetown University's School of Business, where he teaches a course in crisis management and marketplace defense. He is a well-known political consultant, crisis management consultant, and a great, terrific person to talk to. He knows a lot and a lot. So I keep on learning from him every day. So Eric, please.
Good morning. I think that the first thing I would start off to say to you is, when it comes to character assassination, I dwell in the world of the practical. Even though I write and I teach, I am really not fundamentally an academician. I am hired to actually try to moderate the impact of reputational attacks, because the clients that hire me, usually corporations, I don't really like working with celebrities, even though I have. Celebrities tend to be very hard to help. The beauty of working with corporations is they have the leadership, the resources, the flexibility, and the time horizon where you could actually help them. And one of the things that I look at before I take on a case is, can I actually do anything? But a lot of what my clients are facing are quantifiable damages. This is not just hurt feelings. There is a very tangible consequence to what they're facing. I also send a bill. And that's something you need to know, because when I criticize the PR industry, as I do often, as really not really knowing what to do about crisis management, this is based on the fact that I have to send a bill. And if I'm not effective, I'm going to have a problem getting paid. And so it's important that we start out understanding the mercenary nature of how I come at this, because while I don't mean to be abrasive about academia, there's not always that consequence in academia that I face when I am working with a client. One of the things that I have found is it's a lot easier to light a forest fire than it is to put one out. I'm hired to put one out. And one of the problems is when you put one out, there's still a mess. There's still burnt trees. It's still ugly. And so one of the hard things about my job is when it's over, I don't particularly get high fives, because that's just because my client often still has a problem of some kind. One of the things I should also tell you as I start out is I am not, even though I have political views, this is a nonpartisan discussion. I will offend people of all political persuasions. I am not hired. I am not a partisan political consultant. I did work in Reagan's White House, but as you'll hear, I have things to say about both sides. One of the interesting things is that my clients all tend to think that they are victims of character assassination, when they're not. I have worked, a few years ago, you'll remember I was on a panel. And I was on a panel with a woman from an airline. and she was talking about how someone got on her airline airplane. There was some sort of dust up over the seats. People were offended, and they tweeted out an apology, and the problem went away. And this was an audience of PR people who they thought this was the most extraordinary crisis management they had ever heard. And I'm standing on this panel thinking, how much of a jerk do I want to be now? Because that's not a crisis. My clients have been accused of bringing down the global economy. They've been accused of industrial-scale sexual abuse. They have been accused of destroying a habitat for hundreds of years. These are crises where there often are no winners. Yet so many of the clients that come to me believe they're victims of character assassination, when a lot of the times there is a very good reason they're in trouble, because they may have done something that got them there. And so even though there are academic definitions of character assassination, I tend to focus more on what I would call reputational attacks, because with reputational attacks, there often is some truth to it. My firm was founded on the back of a smear. I did some work in the mid-1980s and late 1980s for Audi, the automobile. The Audi 5000, a woman got on TV on 60 Minutes, the wife of a minister. And she said that her Audi 5000 took off in her garage, ran over her son, and killed him. Plaintiff's lawyers set up a group called the Audi Victims Network. I was flying around the country going into newsrooms, and one of the things I remember saying to one of the local reporters, this was a station in Boston, is, do you understand that this car doesn't simply take off? And she looked at me like I was an idiot and said, pointed to the camera and said, yeah, but they don't know that, meaning the people who see this show. The story, the idea of a car that suddenly takes off was too good a story not to do. And nobody cared that it didn't really take off. Audi was destroyed in the United States for over a decade. And the woman who ran over her son later admitted her foot had been on the accelerator. That was 7 years later. But who cares when a company is destroyed? Nobody really, except the employees that are fired. So here you had a company that was decimated, all because of a lie. And what I find is that in a lot of reputational attacks, some are deserved, some are not deserved, and some are in gray areas. For example, I do a lot of pharmaceutical work. Drugs, very effective drugs, there's going to be a percentage of people who take the drug who aren't going to do well. There is going to be a percentage that actually have a really bad reaction. That doesn't mean that a group of pharmaceutical executives went in a room and said, we could make this drug safe, but let's not. I like that. Good. Let's not. Let's go with that. That's rarely how things happen. And the book that, my most recent book that deals with this subject is called Glassjaw. And Glassjaw, I grew up in southern New Jersey. It was a boxing community. And you had Muhammad Ali lived in my town. Joe Frazier trained there. Joey Giardello, who fought Hurricane Carter, lived a few doors down. And I went to the local boxing ring, and I noticed this scary-looking fighter in the ring with some guy who wasn't really impressive-looking. And sure enough, the smaller guy knocked out the bigger guy rather quickly. And the guy I was with said, well, the big guy has a glass jaw, and I hadn't heard that term before. And generally speaking, a glass jaw refers to a scary-looking fighter who actually can't take a punch. His jaw falls apart. There are any number of examples of companies and people who have had glass jaws in recent years. Toyota and their sudden acceleration scandal. A type of lean, finely textured beef called pink slime by ABC News. Paula Deen, who got in trouble, the famous chef. And by the way, I have somewhat of an American bias here. I know not everybody here is American, but I'm going to try to refer to examples that people are going to know. But the very famous chef, Paula Deen, got in trouble because somebody resurrected a deposition from 30 years ago where she admitted using racist terms. Joe Paterno, the famous coach of Penn State, which was an interesting case because there is a tendency to conflate someone who is not aware something is happening with someone covering it up. The story is always a cover-up, as opposed to someone who didn't know something was happening. We insist, one of the things that happens in a scandal where people don't know that there is a bad actor at work is people love to either say you knew and did nothing or you should have known, which is sort of a comical concept that none of us could survive. None of us could survive the concept of we should have known. I have 2 kids. If you think that I have known everything that has gone on, I don't, and I'm a pretty active parent. You also saw the Duke lacrosse case, where a few young men were accused of sexually assaulting an African-American woman. It turned out that that is not what happened at all. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. Closer to home, recently, in the last couple of weeks, a dean at the University of Virginia won her defamation suit against Rolling Stone magazine, which said she looked the other way at sexual assault on that campus. Even more recently, Price Waterhouse, that handled the balloting for the Oscars, this esteemed firm got in trouble for handing the wrong envelope to Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, and now this very esteemed firm is in the news every day being accused of idiocy. A lot of the reason why reputational attacks are getting worse is velocity, the speed with which information travels, volume, the sheer amount of information that's out there, and venom, negativity. So velocity, volume, venom. Negativity moves the internet. It moves news. Positivity doesn't. If I were to come in here today and say to all of you, you know, I was driving over here today and I saw this cat crossing the street and I floored my car so I could go and try to run it over, all of you would be going, my God, this guy's psychotic. You would be reacting, danger, danger. But if I came in here today and said I was driving here and this cat jumped in front of my car and I hit it, your reaction would probably be, well, you know, he seems like a nice enough guy. That's the kind of thing that could happen to me. But the point that I'm making is scariness, the idea that someone is chasing down a cat to hit them. We are hardwired to respond to danger, which is why when you want to attack someone, you allege something that is viscerally distressing to a lot of people. And I talk about in Glassjaw a concept I call the fiasco vortex, which is really another term for a runaway crisis. Nowadays, so you have Price Waterhouse, a reporter called me after the Oscars who was covering it and said, what should I expect in the next few days to see in the news about Price Waterhouse? Well, I said, you're going to see it get worse before it gets better, because what's going to happen is you have the catalyst, you're going to have people diving in front of cameras declaring anything Price Waterhouse does as being mishandled, because the only people who will be put on TV to do the interviews will be people who will say they need to be fired. And so part of the fiasco vortex is you have a crisis, you then have someone getting on TV declaring the crisis to have been mismanaged, you then have plaintiffs' lawyers getting involved, you have all of these snowball effects that you can't control. And one of the things that my industry, one of the beefs that I have with the PR industry is so much of what we want you to believe is, if you hire me, I've got a way to handle all this. Behind here, underneath this board you can't see, is magic. I know magic. You don't. The truth is, I don't know magic either. And there's a great scene in the movie Michael Clayton with George Clooney, which is basically a crisis management movie. It's probably the only time Hollywood got crisis management right. There's a scene where George Clooney plays a fixer. and he goes to the home of a client who just hit somebody with their car. And the client is frantic, work a miracle, work a miracle. And George Clooney says, the math on this is very simple. The smaller the mess you made, the easier it is for me to clean up. I'm not a miracle worker, I'm a janitor. And it was a great line, because one of the first things I have to do with clients who are on the receiving end of reputational attacks is I have to define reality for them. I have to tell them what's doable and what's not. And so nowadays you have, and by the way, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to first talk about the problem, and then I'm going to tell you how some institutions and organizations have gotten out of it. I don't say the solution, because reputational attacks don't have solutions. There are exercises that you can do. But I think nowadays you have speed over accuracy, you have unprecedented acoustics and optics. The Inside Edition tape where Donald Trump was talking about basically sexually assaulting women. You had the visual of Hillary Clinton falling over and stumbling, which made its way around. You had Congressman Anthony's IRS. If a Republican had been in office and had ordered the IRS to go after private citizens, this would have been Watergate. But one of the arguments that I got in with reporters for 8 years is I would go to lunch with them and I'd say, do you see what you are doing? What are we doing? Obama has had an 8-year honeymoon with the press. Not with, by the way, talk radio or Fox News. And my reporter friends would go, Eric, that's the Republican you talking. We cover him just like we cover anybody. And my response is, I am out of the arguing business. However, you are completely wrong, and there will be a boomerang someday to this. Someday there is going to be the long arm of American cultural vengeance, and you are going to be on the receiving end of something that you can't imagine, because you simply are in love with this guy and will not aggressively cover him. Well, the boomerang is here, everybody, because the media, you now have Donald Trump, who the media cannot touch. They can't touch him, because there is so much cultural anger over how Obama was covered that the media simply, you now have someone who can lie and who is absolutely immune from media attacks. And so a lot of what I find, for example, representing an oil, I had the head of an oil company say to me, why can't you do for me what you did for a cosmetics company he knew I worked for? I said, you're an oil company, nobody likes you, they never will. And and I said, well, I talked to some PR person that they said they could turn our reputation around. I said, hire them. They sound terrific. You'll be calling me in 6 months because they're going to fail. But the fact is, an oil company will be covered differently than a cosmetics company. Apple Computer violates every basic law, supposed law of crisis management. You're not supposed to be secretive. No one is more secretive than Apple. You're not supposed to ever insult the consumer. Well, when the iPhone antenna had a problem a few years ago, Steve Jobs basically said, you're holding the phones wrong, you idiots. And rather than the consumer public saying, I am shocked and appalled, I will never buy another Apple product, what did its consumers say? I disappointed Steve. Oh, I'm so stupid. So a lot of what you can get away with depends on what biases there are coming into it. And the story, an allegation doesn't need to be true. It simply needs to be plausible, and it needs to be resonant. Obama being a Muslim, well, he's the first biracial president. He did have a Muslim father. He was an exotic figure. He was also a very exciting personality that was tremendously threatening to his adversaries. Was Obama a Muslim? No, but is it plausible and resonant that this exotic figure could have a different religion? Sure. It just happened not to be true. And Trump and Russia. I am not absolutely convinced you are going to find evidence that the Trump campaign got together with Putin in advance of the election and said, in exchange for you doing our tough, rough work, our wet work, hacking Hillary, and helping us with the election. In exchange for that, we'll go light on sanctions once we get in. I'm going to be very surprised if that turns up. However, if you look at the news in the last few weeks, there is so much Russia stuff that it is plausible that something could have happened there. It just isn't necessarily true. I also find that women and men are treated differently. I got some calls when David Letterman got in trouble a few years ago for having an affair with a coworker, and people said, didn't David Letterman handle this brilliantly? Let me tell you something. Men accused of messing around with women, the reaction is they're dudes being dudes. Women, when they're accused of something, well, they're unstable and they need to be stopped. Martha Stewart, her scandal, insider trading, happened at the same time as Enron, WorldCom, Adelphia, and all of those. Martha Stewart made a $40,000 trade. These other things, tens of billions of dollars disappeared, but you would have thought that Martha Stewart were a member of the Third Reich, because that's what people wanted to talk about. And there is a bias, and I've seen this having represented both women and men. Every story has the construct of a villain, a victim, a vindicator, which I talk about in all of my books. The villain is always my client, that's the corporation. The victim is a vulnerable member of the public. The vindicator are the media or an activist group that comes in to save the day. And it's easier to make people victims. One of the easiest ways to make them victims is, I gave you the example of a push poll. One of the great ways to do it is a speaking complaint. What a speaking complaint is a lawsuit that is larded up with scary looking things. My mother-in-law was reading an article a few years ago, and she went, she's very old-fashioned and very straight-laced, and she went, goodness gracious, this person was accused of fraud, how terrible. And I said, do you understand that when a lawsuit is filed, they don't file a lawsuit and say, we disagree with this person. They file a lawsuit and they accuse you of fraud, of racketeering, because when it's put in a lawsuit, you are largely protected against libel. And so what happens? Activist groups are notorious for filing lawsuits where they allege heinous things about, let's say, a company, knowing they're never going to win the legal case. But every time they file a suit, it will be reported with affection by the news media, because the media love to report stories that allege hideous things, and when the hideous things are in a legal document, they are largely protected from libel. The other thing that I have found is toward the beginning of my career, there was such a concept as a gag order. You would get someone, I had a client, somebody accused them of something bad. They said, we're not going to give you the $1 million you want, but we'll give you $100,000, but sign a gag order that you never talk about it. Well, one of the things that I have found is nowadays nobody respects gag orders. Something has happened when you have somebody sign a gag order and they still leak it to the press, or they still go on television and they violate it, because the sheer appeal of either hurting a target or being on TV overpowers the idea of respecting a gag order. So one of the things that's changed about my business is the gag order is not the option it once was, because what does somebody do? They think they're very clever. They take a thumb drive. Oops, how did this get in the mail of the Washington Post? Nowadays, it's easier, the ability to take information and take it somewhere else, it's easier. When I was younger, if you wanted to leak something from the White House, you had to photocopy it. You had to figure out how to work the copier. You had to figure out how to get a few hundred pages out the door. Now, you send it from somebody else's email. So it's easier to hurt people. So what I've just talked about in the last few minutes is how to attack, how the attacks are getting worse. Let me talk a little bit about what you do when you get one of these cases and how you survive. Nowadays, you see so many TV shows. There's a show called Scandal, and my students often ask me, Is what you do anything like Scandal, Olivia Pope? And the answer is no. One of the things you see on television is there's always the spin doctor who picks up the phone and calls the New York Times and says, New York Times, it's Eric. If you run that story, you'll deal with me. Ooh. That's never happened once in human history. The idea that some PR person can threaten the news media in that way and get a story not to run, it's never happened. I mean, there are ways to get stories not to run, but the idea of fixers is just sheer fantasy. And I think that but people believe it. So one of the first things that I have to deal with now is I have to explain to clients what reality looks like. One of the first things I do is I say, this is what is going to happen to you and how it will unfold. One key to survival is constituents. Is there anybody who wants you to survive? Second, not only how much do people like you, how much do they hate your enemy? One of the reasons why Bill Clinton survived the Lewinsky scandal is people did not like the idea of a right-wing prosecutor looking into someone's sex life. They didn't like it. They also didn't like, and this is relevant to Trump now, the American people are very funny about the idea of someone overturning an election. People did not like the idea of removing a president that they elected. And despite all of the talk that you hear about Trump being impeached, there's a sense in Washington that he's going to implode in a matter of months. It's not easy to remove someone from office because the way the system is set up is our system does not like the idea of overturning an election. So that's very, very hard to do. So you have to look at what constituents you have. And I'm going to talk in a second about corporate constituents. I think that one of the things we dealt with in the Reagan White House is Republicans perpetually have to battle allegations of stupidity. The way Democrats go after Republicans is they say they're all morons. This goes back to Lincoln. And it's even more intense in the American 20th and 21st century. And when I remember being with some of my friends, Democrat friends, when I worked for Reagan, and they would say, what did you say when Reagan would say something stupid? Every now and then Reagan would say, well, 99% of pollution is caused by trees. Mm-hmm. And they were convinced we had this incredibly sophisticated operation to deal with it. And I said, do you know what we say to the press when he says something like that? What do you say? We say he says stuff like that. And that's really all it was. That was your brilliant spin operation. And I think that now I think that the media have the power to vex Donald Trump, but I don't think that they have the power so much to substantially hurt him because he's evaluated as an entertainer, not as a politician. You also have had cases like with Bill O'Reilly, the newscaster, who got in hot water a few years ago because he was accused by left-of-center media of claiming that he had covered the Falklands War. What was very interesting is O'Reilly had constituents. He had people who like him and who don't like his critics. And he got on TV and he fought the allegations savagely. He got on and he said, I did cover the Falklands War. I wasn't right there in the war, but I did cover it. And when you have constituents who want you to survive, you tend to survive. Now contrast this with Anthony Weiner, Congressman Weiner, who initially denied the story. He said, I cannot say with certitude that that was me in my underwear. Well, that blew up when not only did Anthony Weiner not have constituents who really, really like him, a lot of people don't like him, but the woman with whom he was having a relationship with produced the evidence that that was indeed him. So, again, constituents. Hillary Clinton was widely portrayed as being dishonest, and I think that the FBI chief Comey's letter was the final straw, not because people had any understanding of what was being alleged, but because it validated the premise that this is more Clinton slipperiness. People are like, I don't want to hear, I don't know about emails, I don't know Benghazi. It's more Clinton stuff. I don't want to hear about it. And there was a huge constituency that wanted to hear that, and a not so big constituency that didn't want to hear it. Hillary Clinton did not have the ability to galvanize voters the way Barack Obama did, and she simply did not have the kind of constituents that were able to make it backfire. Toyota, in 2009 and 10, accused of sudden acceleration, they had constituents. Toyota owners love their Toyotas. And when these allegations happened, it was very interesting. Toyota was vindicated by no less than NASA. But the news media didn't hardly covered their vindication. Why? Because the better story was that they had cars that suddenly ran away. It was also interesting that Toyota's CEO, Mr. Toyota, went in front of Congress, and you have to go in these sort of corporate crises through the stations of the cross. Apologies, recalls, congressional hearings. And so one of the questions one of my students posed is, do you ever apologize if you didn't do something? And the answer is often yes, because what Toyota did, imagine what would have happened if Toyota had gone before Congress and Congress said, do you apologize? And the CEO went, no. Well, so what do? If you look at how corporations apologize, they don't apologize for hurting people. They apologize for letting their consumers down. Well, why don't they apologize for hurting people? Because that's the end of your company. An apology is admissible in court. Your company is done if you do that. And I always tell a client, your apology will be declared to have been too little, too late, and mismanaged. So what? You'll gut it out. You'll gut it through. A year after Toyota's sudden acceleration scandal, sales were up 70%. And I think but the solution was not PR. The solution was a recall. The solution was rebates. The solution was paying fines. It's all these things that PR people don't really like to talk about because that they're boring. And Toyota preached to their choir. They preached to their loyal customers. They had constituents. Tiger Woods. I worked for some of the corporate sponsors when Tiger Woods got in trouble. I did not work for Tiger Woods. Now, what does a corporate sponsor want in a situation like that? They want the problem to go away. And so you heard people saying, well, Tiger Woods, the pundits were saying he needs to go and tell his side of the story. Do you know what his side of the story was? He did it. That was his side of the story. A lot of the clients that come to me, we need to tell our side of the story, and I have to tell them, you don't have a side of the story. And so what ended up happening is the corporate sponsors of Tiger Woods, some had to let go of him, but what a lot of them said is, we support Tiger's decision to take some time off. That way you don't admonish him, you're not scolding him, and you're not embracing him. A lot of crisis solutions happen below the radar. When the BP oil spill happened a few years ago, I was debating somebody, I think it was CNN, and this other person said, BP really, the problem here is they're really not using social media effectively. And I'm thinking, oh my God, these PR people. The ocean blew up. This is not a function of using social media correctly or not. And my point was, there will be a direct and immediate correlation between when the leak is plugged and when this drops out of the news. And that's exactly what happened. When the leak was plugged, that's when was the beginning of the end of the BP crisis. It had nothing to do with PR. And so the point is, there's a section in Glassjaw where I talk about the crisis management iceberg. The things that happen above the waterline are the PR. But the things that often really resolve crisis are plugging the leak, recalling the car, fixing things. Often this involves pressure testing allegations and investigative work. The reason why the Duke Lacrosse guys were vindicated were because not only were they innocent, but they came from wealthy families. And those families had the resources to investigate and hire counsel to savagely fight back. And one of the unfortunate lessons of damage control is that money does matter. Those who have resources can do things that those can't. I had a client that I will not name, a prominent person, and someone said, if you pay me, a woman came forward and said, if you pay me $20 million, I will not allege sexual assault. And the people surrounding this person, there were PR people and others who said, you need to come clean and fess up and express empathy, all the things that PR types love. And I'm listening to the allegations and I'm saying, this sounds like extortion. This doesn't sound like assault. And by the way, one of the difficult things about dealing with sexual assault cases, and I don't like working on them, the problem with them is they're often true. The other problem is they're often not true. And that's why it's a terrible type of thing to work on. To make a long story short, the crisis management solution was going to the FBI. And the person who made the allegation is in prison now. And so you have to take a look creatively about what solutions are and aren't. I did some work for the feminine care industry. They were facing allegations years ago, not that long ago, that women were getting injured by their products. Well, back in 1980, there was something called toxic shock, where 8 women died as a result of using a particular product. So they couldn't be smart alecks about this. So our question was, why are the media covering injured women when we can't find the injured women? To make a very long story we don't have time for short, what we were able to determine is there was a manufacturer of all natural feminine care products sending thousands of emails into local newsrooms across the country saying there were injured women. There weren't. And so the crisis management solution ended up not talking about the safety of our products. It ended up exposing what was really an internet age dirty trick. One of the things I had been predicting for years that finally happened, I was way off in terms of timing, was I had been arguing in forums like this for years that someday there is going to be a case, a landmark internet case, where the internet is held accountable for defamation. It finally happened with the Hulk Hogan Gawker case, where somebody finally said, you know something? I am going to hit back. I do have the money. In the case of Hulk Hogan, he had a billionaire funding his case. So he had huge resources. So you now have, in the last few months, for the first time, a major internet case where an internet organization was held accountable. And so that happened because of very aggressive pushback. You also had Ringling Brothers doing something in recent years, suing animal rights groups for falsely alleging that they injured animals and hiring plaintiffs who would get on the stand and lie and say that they witnessed animals being injured. So you finally had a company that had the money to hit back. And ultimately, Ringling Brothers is out of the elephant business, and Ringling Brothers is shutting. They have other businesses. But the point is that crisis was solved. And animal rights activists had to pay Ringling Brothers tens of millions of dollars. But that was an extremely aggressive effort. Social media in crisis management is the problem. It's not the solution. And one of the things that I find very troubling is that there is a tendency for the PR industry to say social media is the solution. Why do they do that? Because you can't say to your client, we're not sure how to solve this problem. So what do you say? You say, we've got the answer, it's social media. 9 times out of 10, using social media to fight a crisis makes it worse. Now, whenever I say this, people start to pass out in the audience, because anybody who stands in front of an audience with a headset and little rectangular glasses and says social media is hailed to be a genius. What I'm telling you is social media is a vehicle of dispersion. Crisis management is a discipline of containment. I am trying to get people to not be interested in my client's crisis. I want it to go away. Social media wants it to last. And so it's a terrific attack venue. Now, how do I use social media in my practice? I use it to monitor the state of play. I use it to communicate specific facts. This product is being, this automobile manufactured between 1997 and 2002 is being recalled. Discrete, specific information social media is good for. It's also good to push out exculpatory or vindicating information. However, I have seen time and time again corporations attempt to engage their stakeholders on social media. What could go wrong? Well, let me tell you what could go wrong. Whoever owns the nastiest, most negative, horrible information will hijack social media because that is the currency that works. Social media is not great for saying, you shouldn't believe this. So please don't walk away from this hearing me say social media has no value. That is not the message. The message is, do not instinctively think it is helpful in a crisis, because it often makes things worse. Where it is more helpful is to the forces of attack. As I wind down, what I would tell you is one of the reasons why I work mostly with corporations is because they have the leadership, the resources, the time that individuals don't. I think that the solution to reputational attacks, that the PR and communications component is limited. What really matters most is, do you have constituents? How can those constituents be tapped? Do you have the will to fight? Because fighting back reputational attacks is long and arduous. And one of the things that upsets my clients is there's often never a day that the world stands up and says, we were wrong about you. Because a lot of the services being sold now is, yes, we can erase the internet. We can make the internet not say bad things. Let me tell you, it's a lot harder to do than people could ever imagine. But certain things can be done, and I think a lot of it requires, do you have constituents? Do you have the resources to pressure test allegations? Do you have the time horizon? Because I do think people and organizations have the capacity to recover. They just don't recover immediately. So with that, I hope I've given you a very buttoned up, real world sense of what it is like to make your living fighting these type of issues, and how hard it is, but how optimistic you can be over the long term. So with that, we have a few minutes for questions. And anything that I covered too short, you will find a lot of the themes that I discussed, and I get down into granular detail in Glassjaw, so you might find more answers there. So thanks for listening, and I'm happy to take some questions. I saw a hand somewhere. Yes. I'm sorry. We're going to bring a microphone because I'm unable to hear.
Thank you so much for your great lecture. So I was curious because you were talking at the beginning of your lecture about defamation law. So I have a European background, and so I was curious because we have developed more defamation law compared to
Very
the
different,
US.
yeah.
So if you want to say something, and then I was also interested in hearing. I didn't know about your background. You have been working with all these corporations, and so how does it feel regarding to reputational attacks? Doing with corporations to political stuff, maybe I don't know whether they're like different features that maybe can be outstanding for the political arena. Maybe I'm sure that all of us know about that, but it can be interesting to compare a little bit, like what can be with big corporations, as you were mentioning, like Toyota, or like even like celebrities, and then coming to the political arena. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay. Well, the question number one deals with defamation law, and you're absolutely right. Defamation law is different in different countries, and one of the things that we're finding is we're beginning to look at what our options are in, for example, England and Ireland. In America, with a defamation case, the person being defamed, who claims they are being defamed, is actually the one on trial. So one of the reasons why in America you don't have people fighting defamation claims that much is if you alleged that I don't know, was an international arms smuggler and I'm innocent, if I sued you for that, I would be exposed in American courts to discovery, and all kinds of things about me, whether or not I had anything to do with international arms smuggling or not, would come out there. And you know what? I don't want everything, I mean, even though I'm not particularly sitting on a sinister secret, I don't particularly want you to be able to know everything about me. So what happens in America, you choose not to sue. Now, in England, it's a bit different. When you sue someone, if you sue the media in England or someone else for defamation in England, there's greater vulnerability to the person who defamed you. So what you have to look at is what are the laws of each place, what do the laws of each place say? So that's to your question about defamation. Political cases, your next question involved are the difference between political, corporate, and individuals and character assassination. One of the reasons I don't like working for celebrities, and I have, is with celebrities, whoever tells the biggest lie wins. They are surrounded by people who lie to them. And they do not want someone like me in there saying, well, maybe if you did this thing, did you ever think about repudiating this form of behavior? If you are managing a celebrity, what you are looking to preserve is your relationship with the celebrity. So you are not going to go into a womanizing athlete and say, maybe you shouldn't do that, because that's going to cost you your relationship. And what I have to look at is, there was a time in my life when I was as starstruck as anybody that I thought it was cool working with celebrities. I'm too old for that. And so what I find is the beauty of working with corporations is, interestingly enough, they're really the most honest. Because what will often happen is one person will say, these allegations against our product are not true. But the general counsel will close the door and say, look, let me be honest with you, Eric. Some people who take this drug will have this side effect, because you're not dealing with one person, one ego. You are dealing with kind of a dialectic where there will be somebody in the room to be more honest. With political campaigns, you're dealing with public figures, so you are allowed to say things. I mean, for example, if one of my corporate clients ever alleged that an allegation against them was fake news, they would be lampooned and sued and boycotted from now until the end of time, because nobody really wants to defend a corporation. Corporations can't do what Donald Trump and his press secretary did. I mean, one of my corporate clients couldn't get up and say, a publicly traded company, this product is the best-selling macaroni and cheese in the history of civilization. Because somebody would say, you lied, and then they would have activist groups protesting, they would have shareholder resolutions, they would have all kinds of problems. But if you're the president in a very divisive climate, there's a lot more you can get away with in politics. You don't have to be anchored to the truth. And interestingly, even though my friends who are corporate critics don't believe it when I tell them this, corporations are really rarely in situations where they are going to authorize a lie. What they are most likely to do when they don't want to tell the truth is they will not be helpful. And what they will do is what my clients do all the time. I was on the phone with a client yesterday and I said, well, this allegation, can you deny it? And they said, no. I said, well, then where you're going to end up is you're going to end up releasing a statement that says, we here at Smith and Jones Industries are deeply committed to safety. I mean, every client of my corporate client of mine that gets into trouble, they answer every question with well, we're deeply committed to people. We're all about people. That is what corporations do when they don't really want to talk about something. So that's really the difference. Thank you.
Hi, I got a quick question. Given that you operate in this space professionally, where there's a lot of emotion, and you're close to these arguments, has your own reputation ever been drawn into it?
Oh, yeah.
And have you ever sort of felt, directly drawn into it in terms of your own character, and how have you dealt with that?
Yes, I mean, one of I think the biggest mistakes I've made in my career is a mistake of it's very hard for us to look at ourselves objectively. And one of the things I realized too late is there are people who just think what I do for a living is immoral. They simply believe that anyone accused of an attack deserves it, and that defending them is wrong. I have to tell you, I believed so much. I mean, as you can see, I'm enthusiastic about this subject. I believe so much in it, although, by the way, I am very honest that not everybody who's accused of something is innocent. I mean, but I have been attached to lawsuits. I have been investigated because there are people who, when my clients are hated, I have made my living for over 30 years taking sides. The people who come after my clients are powerful. Plaintiffs' lawyers, labor unions, members of Congress, investigative media, and I have most certainly gotten jammed up in situations simply because I worked for them. And I have to tell you, I've got, one of the questions that's an amendment to yours is, do I ever turn away business? And the answer is I turn away most. Most. Because I have to practice defensive medicine. And I got that. I didn't realize that until I was at dinner with a friend of mine who's a heart surgeon, and he was talking about a patient, and he said, well, I'm going to fire the patient. And I went, wait. I had never thought of the concept of firing a patient. And I said, tell me about that. He said, look, I've been telling this guy for 30 years, stop smoking, stop overeating. He won't. I'm going to get him on the table, and he's going to die, and he's going to sue me. And it was an epiphany for me. And so now, if I think something, I mean, I still take on controversial cases, but I have, there's some nasty stuff about me out there, and here I am, spin doctor, magician. I can't remove this stuff from the internet because somebody put it out there. So I deal with it by taking, number one, becoming very selective in what I take on. So I don't take on things if I think it's going to get me into trouble. There have been times that I have hired defamation lawyers to go after. I have worked with defamation lawyers, and I did have a news outlet that I had litigation with because what they were alleging was false and defamatory. And so those are the types of things that I do. And the biggest thing that I do is I don't take things. I don't, the American law, everybody has the right to a defense. People don't have the right to a good reputation. There's nothing in the Constitution about that. I reserve the right not to work with someone because I just don't like them. I got a call a few years ago from a company. They were a company upstream had a fire and dumped, stuff was dumped in a river. The company downstream said, you know what, let's dump our stuff. No one's going to know the difference between their stuff and our stuff. And they wanted me to defend them. I went, no, I'm simply not going to do it. I don't do as much criminal defense work as I used to, simply because people are uncomfortable with it. I'm very uncomfortable with taking on sexual assault related cases anymore because I have women in the office who, whether the person's guilty or innocent, they're just not comfortable working on stuff like that, and I have to think about that. So that's how I deal with it. But yeah, it's funny. I was saying when I started this business and I would tell people what I did for a living, they would say, "What? You do what? How do you what?" Now I tell somebody what I do, and they say, "Yeah, my sister-in-law does that." And so, every now and then I'll be a smart aleck, and I'll say to somebody who says they're in crisis management, "How many subpoenas have you gotten lately?" And I remember one person said, I've never gotten a subpoena. I said, guess what? You're not a crisis manager. Because if you haven't been gotten nasty grams from Congress, been investigated by the media and are sued, you're not in the crisis management business. One more?
This is more of a nuts and bolts question, but you mentioned general counsel, and when you're working with corporations and you're in that first or second meeting, I guess I would call it a discovery meeting, and the corporation's legal counsel is there, and they're saying, we can't say that, we can't do that. How do you balance kind of the communication solution with the legal issues and the legal component, all that?
Well, that is a daily challenge for us, because I think that in the hierarchy of needs, the most important need is your physical survival. Then it's your liberty, not being in jail. Then it's your reputation. If given the choice between having a lousy reputation but being able to walk around and be free, I'd rather have a bad reputation but not be in prison. So one of the things you have to look at with general counsels is, what is the hierarchy? Generally speaking, we have to arm wrestle with lawyers. Lawyers want you to say as little as possible. Communicators want you to say as much as possible. And so one of the biggest problems that I've had in recent years is I am now finding more than ever general counsels who will not let us say the product is safe. You're hearing that correctly. General counsels do not want you to say the product is safe. And what I will often say is, if you can't say you stand by this product, what do you think I can do? And because, and so what ends up happening is the CEO, the key to a good crisis management team is there needs to be a decision maker. And sometimes the CEO will overrule the general counsel and say, Eric's right. We can't continue making this product if we can't say we stand by it. Other times the general counsel will say to the CEO, there is so much litigation, we can't say the product is safe. So it's adjudicated on a case-by-case basis, but there's no other nice way to say it than there is extreme tension between communications and legal, and it doesn't, by the way, mean either one is wrong. Both are correct in accordance with their discipline. You simply have to decide, I find there are certain products that if people understand that there's an inherent risk, it may allow the company to say something different. Then there are certain products we simply expect and demand to be safe. So in that initial meeting, there's an arm wrestling match, and it's very uncomfortable, but there has to be, if I don't have a decision maker who will rule, I don't have a client. Because let me tell you, the vice president of PR is not going to be in the position to make that decision. They simply don't have the power. But the CEO and general counsel tend to. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope you have a good conference.
We want to thank Eric Dezenhall on the behalf of the Communication Department, Surge, and the CARP Research Lab with this small token of our
Well, thank
appreciation
you.
for his time and commitment to the CARP conference this year.
I'm all about presence.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, thanks. Bye. Talk to you. Take care.